Chapters 33 and 34 of The Torrents of Spring by Ivan Turgenev, translated by Constance Garnet. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 33. It takes less than an hour in these days by rail from Frankfurt to Wiesbaden. At that time the extra post did it in 3 hours. They changed horses 5 times. Part of the time Polozov dozed, and part of the time he simply shook from side to side, holding a cigar in his teeth. He talked very little. He did not once look out of the window. Picturesque views did not interest him. He even announced that nature was the death of him. Sanin did not speak either, nor did he admire the scenery. He had no thought for it. He was all absorbed in reflections and memories. At the stations Polozov paid with exactness, took the time by his watch, and tipped the postilions more or less according to their zeal. When they had gone half-way, he took 2 oranges out of the hamper of edibles, and choosing out the better, offered the other to Sanin. Sanin looked steadily at his companion, and suddenly burst out laughing. "What are you laughing at?" the latter inquired, very carefully peeling his orange with his short white nails. "What at?" repeated Sanin. "Why, at our journey together." "What about it?" Polozov inquired again, dropping into his mouth one of the longitudinal sections into which an orange parts. "It's so very strange. Yesterday, I must confess, I thought no more of you than of the Emperor of China, and today I'm driving with you to sell my estate to your wife, of whom too I have not the slightest idea." "Anything may happen," responded Polozov. "When you've lived a bit longer you won't be surprised at anything. For instance, can you fancy me riding as an orderly officer? But I did, and the Grand Duke Mihail Pavlovitch gave the order. Trot! Let him trot, that fat cornet! Trot now, look sharp!" Sanin scratched behind his ear. "Tell me, please, Ippolit Sidorovitch, what is your wife like? What is her character? It's very necessary for me to know that, you see." "It was very well for him to shout 'Trot!'" Polozov went on with sudden vehemence. "But me? How about me? I thought to myself, you can take your honours and epaulets and leave me in peace. But you asked about my wife. What my wife is? A person like anyone else. Don't wear your heart upon your sleeve with her. She doesn't like that. The great thing is to talk a lot to her. Something for her to laugh at. Tell her about your love or something. But make it more amusing, you know." "How more amusing?" "Oh, you told me, you know, that you were in love, wanting to get married. Well, then, describe that." Sanin was offended. "What do you find laughable in that?" Polozov only rolled his eyes. The juice from the orange was trickling down his chin. "Was it your wife sent you to Frankfurt to shop for her?" asked Sanin after a short time. "Yes, it was she." "What are the purchases?" "Toys, of course." "Toys? Have you any children?" Polozov positively moved away from Sanin. "That's likely! What do I want with children? Feminine fallals, finery for the toilet." "Do you mean to say you understand such things?"
"To be sure I do."
"But didn't you tell me you didn't interfere in any of your wife's affairs?"
"I don't in any other, but this is no consequence. To pass the time one may do it. And my wife has confidence in my taste, and I'm a first-rate hand at bargaining."
Polozov began to speak by jerks. He was exhausted already. "And is your wife very rich?"
"Rich? Yes, rather. Only she keeps the most of it for herself."
"But I expect you can't complain either."
"Well, I'm her husband. I'm hardly likely not to get some benefit from it. and I'm of use to her. With me she can do just as she likes. I'm easy-going."
Polozov wiped his face with a silk handkerchief and puffed painfully, as though to say, "Have mercy on me, don't force me to utter another word. You see how hard it is for me." Sanin left him in peace, and again sank into meditation. The hotel in Wiesbaden, before which the carriage stopped, was exactly like a palace. Bells were promptly set ringing in its inmost recesses, a fuss and bustle arose. Men of good appearance in black frock coats skipped out at the principal entrance, a doorkeeper who was a blaze of gold opened the carriage doors with a flourish. Like some triumphant general, Polozov alighted and began to ascend a staircase strewn with rugs and smelling of agreeable perfumes. To him flew up another man, also very well dressed, but with a Russian face, his valet. Polozov observed to him that for the future he should always take him everywhere with him, for the night before at Frankfurt he, Polozov, had been left for the night without hot water. The valet portrayed his horror on his face and bending down quickly took off his master's galoshes.
"Is Maria Nikolaevna at home?" inquired Polozov.
"Yes, sir. Madam is pleased to be dressing. Madam is pleased to be dining tonight at the Countess Lazunsky's."
"Ah, there? Stay, there are things there in the carriage. Get them all yourself and bring them up. And you, Dmitri Pavlovitch," added Polozov, "take a room for yourself and come in 3/4 of an hour. We will dine together."
Polozov waddled off, while Sanin asked for an inexpensive room for himself, and after setting his attire to rights and resting a little, he repaired to the immense apartment occupied by His Serenity, Durchlaucht, Prince von Polozov. He found this prince enthroned in a luxurious velvet armchair in the middle of a most magnificent drawing-room. Sanin's phlegmatic friend had already had time to have a bath and to array himself in a most sumptuous satin dressing-gown. He had put a crimson fez on his head. Sanin approached him and scrutinized him for some time. Polozov was sitting rigid as an idol. He did not even turn his face in his direction, did not even move an eyebrow, did not utter a sound. It was truly a sublime spectacle. After having admired him for a couple of minutes, Sanin was on the point of speaking, of breaking this hallowed silence, when suddenly the door from the next room was thrown open, and in the doorway appeared a young and beautiful lady in a white silk dress trimmed with black lace, and with diamonds on her arms and neck, Maria Nikolaevna Polozov. Her thick fair hair fell on both sides of her head, braided, but not fastened up into a knot. 34. "Ah, I beg your pardon," she said with a smile, half embarrassed, half ironical, instantly taking hold of one end of a plait of her hair and fastening on Sanin's her large grey clear eyes. "I did not think you had come yet."
"Sanin, Dmitri Pavlovitch, known him from a boy,"
observed Polozov, as before, not turning towards him and not getting up, but pointing at him with one finger. "Yes, I know. You told me before. Very glad to make your acquaintance. But I wanted to ask you, Ippolit Sidorovitch, my maid seems to have lost her senses to-day."
"To do your hair up?"
"Yes, yes, please." "I beg your pardon," Maria Nikolaevna repeated with the same smile. She nodded to Sanin and turning swiftly vanished through the doorway, leaving behind her a fleeting but graceful impression of a charming neck, exquisite shoulders, an exquisite figure. Polozov got up and, rolling ponderously, went out by the same door. Sanin did not doubt for a single second that his presence in Prince Polozov's drawing-room was a fact perfectly well known to its mistress. The whole point of her entry had been the display of her hair, which was certainly beautiful. Sanin was inwardly delighted indeed at this freak on the part of Madame Polozov. If, he thought, she is anxious to impress me, to dazzle me, perhaps, who knows, she will be accommodating about the price of the estate. His heart was so full of Gemma that all other women had absolutely no significance for him. He hardly noticed them. And this time he went no further than thinking, yes, it was the truth they told me. That lady's really magnificent to look at. But had he not been in such an exceptional state of mind, he would most likely have expressed himself differently. Maria Nikolaevna Polozov, by birth Kalishkin, was a very striking personality, and not that she was of a beauty to which no exception could be taken. Traces of her plebeian origin were rather clearly apparent in her. Her forehead was low, her nose rather fleshy and turned up. She could boast neither of the delicacy of her skin, nor of the elegance of her hands and feet. But what did all that matter? Anyone meeting her would not, to use Pushkin's words, have stood still before the holy shrine of beauty, but before the sorcery of a half-Russian, half-gypsy woman's body in its full flower and full power, and he would have been nothing loath to stand still. But Gemma's image preserved Sanin like the threefold armour of which the poets sing. 10 minutes later Maria Nikolaevna appeared again, escorted by her husband. She went up to Sanin, and her walk was such that some eccentrics of that, alas, already distant day were simply crazy over her walk alone. That woman, when she comes towards one, seems as though she is bringing all the happiness of one's life to meet one of them used to say. She went up to Sanin, and holding out her hand to him, said in her caressing and, as it were, subdued voice in Russian, "You will wait for me, won't you? I'll be back soon." Sanin bowed respectfully, while Maria Nikolaevna vanished behind the curtain over the outside door, and as she vanished, turned her head back over her shoulder and smiled again, and again left behind her the same impression of grace. When she smiled, not one, and not two, but 3 dimples came out on each cheek, and her eyes smiled more than her lips, long, crimson, juicy lips, with 2 tiny moles on the left side of them. Polozov waddled into the room and again established himself in the arm-chair. He was speechless as before, but from time to time a queer smile puffed out his colourless and already wrinkled cheeks. He looked like an old man, though he was only 3 years older than Sanin. The dinner with which he regaled his guest would of course have satisfied the most exacting gourmand. But to Sanin it seemed endless, insupportable. Polozov ate slowly, with feeling, with judgment, with deliberation, bending attentively over his plate and sniffing at almost every morsel. First he rinsed his mouth with wine, then swallowed it and smacked his lips. Over the roast meat he suddenly began to talk, but of what? Of merino sheep, of which he was intending to order a whole flock, and in such detail, with such tenderness, using all the while endearing pet names for them. After drinking a cup of coffee, hot to boiling point, he had several times in a voice of tearful irritation mentioned to the waiter that he had been served the evening before with coffee cold as ice, and bitten off the end of a Havana cigar. With his crooked yellow teeth he dropped off, as his habit was, into a nap, to the intense delight of Sanin, who began walking up and down with noiseless steps on the soft carpet, and dreaming of his life with Gemma, and of what news he would bring back to her. Polozov, however, awoke, as he remarked himself, earlier than usual. He had slept only an hour and a half, and after drinking a glass of iced seltzer water, and swallowing 8 spoonfuls of jam, Russian jam, which his valet brought him in a dark-green, genuine Kiev jar, and without which, in his own words, he could not live, he stared with his swollen eyes at Sanin, and asked him wouldn't he like to play a game of fools with him. Sanin agreed readily. He was afraid that Polozov would begin talking again about lambs and ewes and fat tails. The host and the visitor both adjourned to the drawing-room, the waiter brought in the cards, and the game began, not of course for money. At this innocent diversion Maria Nikolaevna found them on her return from the Countess Lasunsky's. She laughed aloud directly she came into the room and saw the cards and the open card table. Sanin jumped up, but she cried, "Sit still, go on with the game, I'll change my dress directly and come back to you," and vanished again with a swish of her dress, pulling off her gloves as she went. She did in fact return very soon. Her evening dress she had exchanged for a full lilac silk tea gown, with open hanging sleeves. A thick twisted cord was fastened around her waist. She sat down by her husband, and waiting till he was left full, said to him, "Come, dumpling, that's enough." At the word dumpling Sanin glanced at her in surprise, and she smiled gaily, answering his look with a look, and displaying all the dimples on her cheeks. "I see you are sleepy. Kiss my hand and get along, and Monsieur Sanin and I will have a chat together alone."
"I am not sleepy,"
observed Polozov, getting up ponderously from his easy-chair,
"but as for getting along, I am ready to get along and to kiss your hand."
She gave him the palm of her hand, still smiling and looking at Sanin. Polozov too looked at him and went away without taking leave of him. "Well, tell me, said Maria Nikolaevna eagerly, setting both her bare elbows on the table and impatiently tapping the nails of one hand against the nails of the other. "Is it true, they say, you are going to be married?" As she said these words, Maria Nikolaevna positively bent her head a little on one side, so as to look more intently and piercingly into Sanin's eyes. End of chapters 33 and 34.